Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Announcement lang po para sa ating mga panauhin dito sa loob ng Zoom. Ihanda po ninyo ang inyong mga placards at mga sign card or na mga hawak ninyo. Katulad po ng mga nasa likod ko na mga call for just peace para mamaya sa isasagawa natin na photo op. At sa atin ding mga panauhin na nandito, sana po ay i-off natin ang ating mga mic or i-mute natin ang ating mga mic. Pakiclick lang po ng mic button sa lower left corner ng inyong Zoom screen. Salamat po.
Pag-imanin, isa't puso ang pamana, pagkaisahin ng bago at luma, at sabay-sabay awitin, at sabay-sabay awitin. Pakinggan ang aming iyaw sa ang sulok man ng lansangan.
Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Magandang umaga sa ating mga panauhin at magandang umaga din sa ating mga manonood at mga tagapagpakinig. Kumusta po kayo dyan? Ako po si Father Chris Ablon ng Iglesia Filipina Independiente. Ako po ang inyong magiging tagapagpadaloy sa umagang ito. Salamat sa pasada para sa ating napakagandang pambungad na awit. Ang sabi nga nila, sama-sama tayo sa paglikha ng bagong komunidad. Say your peace. Ito po ang ating pag-uusapan sa umagang ito, mga kapatid. Sabi nga ng awitin kanina, pakinggan ang aming hiling at hiyaw. Lupang sagana, malayo sa kahirapan, bayang payapa, batay sa katarungan. Ang tanong, ito ba'y mananatili na lamang na hiling, hiyaw o pangarap? Ang sagot po ay hindi. Hindi dapat. dapat na matutupad at maaabot. At talagang matutupad at maaabot din natin ang kapayapaang ating inaasam. Sa umagang ito, buksan natin ang ating mga puso at isipan para sa pagsulong ng kapayapaang nakabatay sa katarungan. Mga kapatid, dalawang bahagi po ang ating webinar ngayong umaga. Ang unang bahagi ay ang paglalahad ng kalagayan ng kapayapaan sa ngayon at ang at mga balakid o ika nga ay mga challenges sa peace building. Ang ikalawang bahagi naman ay ang paglalahad ng naging tagumpay ng mga gawain sa kapayapaan. Mula dito at matatanaw natin ang hinaharap sa usaping ito. And each segment ay magkakaroon ng open forum. Kaya makinig po kayo at maghanda ng inyong mga katanungan. Ayos ba? Para po tayo ay mag-umpisa, ang ating una pong tagapagsalita ay hindi na talaga kailangan nating i-introduce pa. Narito po mga kapatid, kapiling natin ngayon ang ating pinakamamahal na Most Reverend Bishop Gerardo Alminasa mula sa Diocese ng San Carlos, Negros Occidental. Take it away, Bishop.
How do we say our peace when the poor and struggling are being viciously killed? When human rights activists and environmental defenders are gunned down in the street? When fear grips the hearts of the people as their government is found wanting, neither honoring civil liberties nor acting with justice and compassion toward the toiling majority? Can we speak of peace when militarism abounds and thousands are killed in Tokhang-style operations? Our people are besieged. The bent over with heavy burdens in the cane fields of the landlords are attacked and threatened for planting sustenance crops. Others have been dragged to jail under questionable and blatantly fictitious charges. The killings spread from those supposedly involved in drugs to those supposedly supporting the New People's Army, to those who are red tagged and vilified for their human rights advocacy or delivery of services to poor communities. We must say our piece. When we speak of peace, we are not talking about the silence of the graveyard. We're not speaking about keeping quiet, especially when such silence is a response to the great trepidation and terror. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 to 9 tells us, and I quote, "Speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." End quote. As the human rights situation in the Philippines has deteriorated under the Duterte administration, I have continued to call for peace building. In our diocese, we ring the bells to stop the killings. The bells are intended to prick the conscience of those who move in our midst and exact evil in killing hapless civilians. They must turn from their wicked ways. The bells ring as a soothing reminder to families who have been victimized that we are with them in their grief. Most importantly, They are a clarion call to our people that we must rise and pursue justice and peace together. We must be careful and take seriously the work of peace, else we may be deserving of the admonition of the prophet Jeremiah, who lamented, and I quote, "They have treated the wound of my people carelessly, saying, 'Peace, peace,' when there is no peace." End quote. Let us speak out, do our part, and say our piece. We must dare to proclaim prophetically what plagues our nation. The COVID-19 pandemic has made life difficult, but the social ills in our country have been with us much longer than this. When peace advocates call to address the roots of the armed conflict, we embrace the difficult work of peace. For peace is the fullness of life, not merely an absence of war. We have to ask ourselves, why do people join or support a revolution? Why they do resist a government? The answer whispers clear when we take seriously the wounds of the people. They are landless, hungry, exploited, and marginalized. And the leaders of this land only treat them more harshly through increasing militarization and weaponizing the law against the poor, the disenfranchised, and those who dare to express their democratic right to dissent. We must say our piece and identify the laws and state policies that impinge on democratic freedoms and deny basic human rights in our society. Under this pandemic, this has become even more muddled and fraught with pitfalls. Police operations in many poor communities have reinforced indignation by being unreasonably harsh on supposed violators, while simultaneously weak in science and health-based protocols, plans, and implementation. The government seems to want to punish and punish rather than aid, educate, and heal. Furthermore, the passage of the anti-terrorism law under this pandemic now renders any person vulnerable to an overreach by the upper echelon of government, frighteningly saturated with military men. There will be no peace when social justice and democratic freedoms are denied. Working for a just peace in the Philippines is truly the most important effort we can undertake. I would like to encourage both the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines to return to peace negotiations. However, if under the present conditions they cannot, we must still urge them to consider what makes for peace. The substantive agenda as articulated in the Hague Joint Declaration of 1992 can still guide our peace building. the Comprehensive Agreement on the Respect for Human Rights, and international humanitarian law set in motion an expectation to uphold the rights of civilians and also combatants. Much of what was agreed upon articulates what has been enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other UN human rights instruments. It should not be the case that thousands upon thousands were killed under a so-called war on drugs. It should not be the case that more than 600 were killed in police drug operations since the beginning of January 2020. Likewise, the 328 persons documented as killed for political reasons from June 2016 to August 2020 is very disturbing. On our island in Negros alone, there have been 90 killings since January of 2017. It is dismaying that included amongst these killings are two NDFP peace consultants. Randy Malayo was executed in the dead of night on provincial bus as it stopped at a station in Nueva Vizcaya on January 30, 2019. Randall Ichanes was treacherously killed 39 days ago in his own residence under lockdown curfew. His death was hair-raisingly vicious as his autopsy reveals scores of puncture and stab wounds before his death. Both Randy and Randall were to be protected under the Joint Agreement on Security and Immunity Guarantees, or JASIG, of the JRP NDFP peace negotiation. On the basis of CARIL, or international humanitarian law alone, their deaths are an affront to both peace work and human decency. Furthermore, 11 NDFP peace consultants and staff are currently detained. The jails, our jails, should not be increasingly full of political prisoners who now number more than 5,000 throughout the country, with approximately 100 from Negros Island. Especially in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, the elderly, sickly, and nursing mothers among them could be allowed safer haven outside the severely overcrowded prisons. As peace advocates, we continue to clamor for the welfare of those who have stepped forward in efforts to dialogue and negotiate. Their efforts should be appreciated, their rights respected, and their persons protected. Respecting human rights is essential for building a just and lasting peace. Presently, we have a problem. Only a few days ago, United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said this about our country, the Philippines, and I quote, there is clearly an urgent need to revoke the policies that continue to result in killings and other human rights violations, to bring to justice the perpetrators, and to halt the use of rhetoric inciting violence against people who use or sell drugs, unquote. The same is true for rhetoric and policies that incite violence against activists, human rights defenders, and those who express dissent. We must urge the government to refrain from tactics intended to terrorize those who simply exercise democratic rights to dissent, freedom of expression, or freedom of association. Even more, it is of disrepute to target those who are defending human rights and working for social change. Rhetoric that seeks to normalize violence, impunity for violations by state forces, or marginalization of poor communities should be set aside. Such behaviors truly are obstacles to a just and lasting peace. Instead, we should embrace the spirit of peace building. As peace advocates, we have been following the progress of the GRP and NDFP peace negotiations. We have joined the aspiration for a just and lasting peace and have monitored the substantive work crafted through diligent dialogue. Before the peace talks floundered, the focus was on socio-economic reforms. This should inspire us, especially under the current economic crisis exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The clamor for rural and urban development has long been rising throughout the country. Perhaps there are lessons and ideas that peace advocates can glean from the GRP and DFP process. Peace process that will help us to respond to our current challenges. We should not falter or rest from our efforts to work for justice, especially in this time of distress and worrisome state policies. We must keep up the efforts to say that the peace we want based on social justice, freedom, righteousness, and democracy. We must work to right the wrongs around us and demonstrate reliable assistance and accompaniment with victims of human rights violations. We must engage social solidarity with the poor and the marginalized. The Duterte administration must be challenged to pivot away from human rights violations, militarism, strong-armed terror tagging. This will bring us to no good. Militarist annihilation tactics only deepen inequity and oppression, worsening the wounds in our nation. We can see this in the brutal slay of our dear Zara Alvarez on August 17, 2020. Zara was gunned down while walking to her boarding house in Bacolod City. An industrious and much beloved human rights worker Zara had been illuminating the real experiences of exploitation endured by the toiling field workers and landless peasants. She communicated with human rights defenders and peace advocates both within the country and around the world. She was as courageous as she was kind. And up to this day, I still cannot fathom the evil it must take to murder a diligent and compassionate woman as she offered herself without reservation to the ministry of healing the broken and sick, to the advocacy of righting wrongs, and to the vision of building peace based on justice, democracy, and freedom. Sarah now lives behind an orphan daughter and grieving communities that benefited from her service and her peace building among them. Sarah was avid participant in peace activities and an unabashed activist. She had been a political prisoner from 2012 to 2014. Her picture had been placed on military most wanted posters. She had been followed and subjected to various surveillance operations. And in the last year, she received multiple death threats. She was an apologetic and brave human rights defender, hard at work to document the violations committed against ordinary people on our beloved Negros Island. The turmoil and discontent sparked by such killing is real. Even in my own heart, I have a hard time reconciling and imagining a simple return to GRP and NDFP peace talks. The potential is there. A desire for genuine dialogue, social reforms, and people-centered development pulses in my veins. But the current atmosphere leaves much to be desired. So for now, let us say our piece. We must summon the Filipino people to speak out on what is happening and to stand for what is just. Let us encourage the peace-seeking voices, no matter how peripheral in the current administration, to step forward and agitate for an end to militarist state policies and the glorification of killing and violence. Let us challenge them to say their piece. As we seek to remove the obstacles to building a just and lasting peace, we continue to call on the GRP and the NDFP to address the roots of the armed conflict and send forward peace builders who will take seriously the wounds of our people. We must not give up our hope. In God's time, peace will come if we dare to strive for it through our social justice advocates and advocacies. We must live for social transformation and work to build the just peace that we wish to see in the world. If we all work together, we can do it. Say your peace.
Amen. Amen talaga, Bishop. Mga kapatid, talagang nakakaantig ang mensahe ni Bishop sapagkat talaga namang nakakaantig sa damdamin ang mga nangyayari sa ating paligid, lalo na sa usaping pangkapayapaan. Si Bishop Alminasa po, mga kapatid, bilang pagtugon sa mga tuloy-tuloy na pagpaslang dyan sa Negros, ay tuloy-tuloy din ang kanyang pagpanawagan para sa tunay na kapayapaan. Kaya inilunsad nila ni Bishop sa kanilang diocese ang Ring the Bells for Peace to Stop the Killings. Sabi nga ni Bishop, mga kapatid, sa kanyang speech, let us boldly and do our part to stand the gap and provide soothing and healing ointments. And yeah, this is not an easy task. Peace builders are righteousness seekers din. Sa atin pong susunod na bahagi ay isa ring manggagawa ng simbahan ang ating makakapiling. Siya po ay matagal na peace advocate at active sa pag-facilitate sa peace building efforts bilang founding member ng Philippine Ecumenical Peace Platform. He is here with us to represent the Free Ray Casambre movement. Friends and guests, let us welcome Pastor Kobe Pam. Pastor, take it away.
Yes. Good morning at magandang umaga sa atin lahat. I speak before you today feeling humbled by this occasion, particularly because questions may be asked. Who is this outsider given prime time at this event? So allow me to introduce myself as Director of the Justice and Peace Center of Silliman University and as international representative of the Philippine Ecumenical Peace Platform accompanying the peace talks between the government and the National Democratic Front in the Philippines. And so it is with these credentials that I sit here before you, and it is with these credentials that I have been granted the privilege to enter Camp Bagong Diwa and visit with the NDFP consultants who languish on the top floor of an overcrowded prison. Thus, it is in humility that I ask you to grant me your trust and find me worthy of speaking at this occasion. Journeying with the peace talks offers a valuable window into unmasking the immediate and the broader tragedy of these times. To speak to the immediate, I would like to invite you and take you with me to the top floor of Bagong Diwa to visit the prison in Taguig. As we know, heat rises, and as we know, budgets are stolen, and as we know, cells are overcrowded. To arrive at the fourth floor is stepping around in between and even sometimes over people onto a steamy hot hallway of cells lined up with laundry hanging, broken benches, unpainted walls, and rusty bars. And somewhere down the hall, that crowded hall, a slender elderly man is standing. It is NDFP consultant and director of the Philippine Peace Center, Ray Casambre. A mix of cracked and broken plastic chairs and wooden benches become our meeting space in the hallway. Other NDF consultants begin to come out and we gather and begin to speak to one another. These consultants have stood by the dream of a Philippines free of oppression and injustice for 40 and 50 years, and they are now in their 70s and even beyond. As I look at their aging faces, I am saddened by their vulnerability, incarcerated in this prison. A sudden illness would mean time to secure clearance papers, to get to a doctor, time in waiting for an ambulance, time to be brought down 5 flights of stairs, time to be received into the public hospital, time that their vulnerable bodies just do not have. Within minutes of our meeting, my heart was crying in anguish. If there is any compassion left in this world, free these vulnerable persons on humanitarian grounds. This inhumane treatment has to end. This inhumane treatment has to end. Each time I have sat with the consultants there, I'm at a loss of words. What can I say? What hope can I bring? What are the words I can utter or speak? Is there any message from me? But perhaps what makes these NDF consultants different from you and me is their enduring hope grounded in thoughtful analysis and sustained by a vision that genuine freedom, liberating justice, and lasting peace will come one day. Yes, will come even out of the darkest night. And so it is not so much my voice that is important here today, but rather the voice of enduring hope from an NDFP consultant who, despite incarceration in a crowded cell, who despite isolation from loved ones, can speak of enduring hope even in these dark times. Allow me to share with you a few reflections from NDFP consultant Ray Casambre of the Philippine Peace Center, writing in prison at Bagong Diwa, where he is incarcerated while undergoing trial for alleged, and I underscore alleged, illegal possession of explosive material. He begins by warning us, and I quote, "Unfortunately, the situation now is qualitatively worse for the peace talks. The peace negotiations are not only stalled, they have been unilaterally terminated by the Duterte regime several times over. Proclamation 360 declaring a termination of the talks, and Proclamation 374 declaring the Communist Party of the Philippines and New People's Army as terrorist organizations are unprecedented obstacles to the resumption of negotiations. In the same way, Memorandum Order 32 declaring a state of emergency in Negros, Bicol, and Samar, coupled with Executive Order 70 creating the National Task Force ending local communist armed conflict, have resulted in increased killings, disappearances, arrests, detentions, and other grave human rights violations, as our good bishop has just presented to us. Systematically, these have played into wrongly codifying those who resist as communist terrorists or supporters, obstructing the nation's march to peace, and shall be dealt with accordingly. The Filipino people have suffered enough from these ridiculous, malicious accusations and vicious attacks. But a consultant like Ray Casambre is a consultant because out of the darkest night, they can see light. Out of the darkest night, they can see a way forward. NDFP consultant Ray Casambre continues, and I quote again, "These qualitatively different times require a qualitatively different response. In the past, you have often heard me say, each time peace negotiations have stalled, go out. It only means we have to work harder, build broader peace constituency, and push for the resumptions. But these times now require something more from us. We must now think of how we can contribute to removing the obstacles to the resumption of the peace talks, such as EO 70, MO 32, Proclamation 360, and Proclamation 374, to name only the most crucial ones. And we must remain unfazed and resist all attempts to brand us as terrorists or coerce us into silence and submission. Finally, it is no longer enough. It is no longer enough to be a mere peace advocate. To meet the challenge of working for transformative peace in these times, we must now transform ourselves and our institutions to become peace activists. Activism is not a crime. Activism is not terrorism. Activism is our way of working for transformative peace. Activism is our response to these very challenging times. Let us rise to the occasion. Let us lift our work. There is so much to be done, and we cannot stop until it is done. Ray Casambre from his prison cell, December 4, 2019. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Pastor Kobe Pam, sa pagbibigay sa amin at paghahatid sa amin sa boses ni Ray Casambre galing po sa bilangguan. Very, very inspiring. Mga kapatid, para sa ating next speaker, we have with us another staunch peace advocate. Her lineage says it all. Siya ang kasalukuyang Executive Director ng Gaston Ortega's Peace Institute. Siya rin ang recipient ng Ateneo de Manila University's Parangal ng Lingkod ng Sambayanan. Mga kapanalig, kaibigan at mga kasama. Kasama po natin si Binibining Karen Tanyada. Karen?
Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Maraming salamat sa Pilgrims for Peace at iba pang organisador dito na sa pagkakataon na makibahagi ngayon at to say my piece, no? Ilang punto lang din po ang aking ibabahagi dahil napaka mahalaga at madami na po yung nabahagi sa atin ni Bishop at talagang nakakaantig din na marinig yung boses na ibinahagi sa atin ni Ray Casambre mula ni Pastor Kobe, no? So ito ay ilang naisip ko lamang na punto. Una po na siguro kahit na ganito yung panahon natin at napakahirap, mahalaga pa rin, nakikita pa rin natin ang kahalagahan ng peace negotiations. Ito ay dahil ito yung isang mahalagang paraan paano nga magkaroon ng pagbabago sa ating lipunan tungo sa katarungan at sa mapayapang paraan. Sa totoo nga, ako'y tumanda na sa pakikialam dito sa peace talks na ito. No? Naging bahagi ako ng Coalition for Peace noong 1987. So 33 years na po. At ito'y isang koalisyon ng mga political groups, mga sektor at mga individual na gusto nun sumuporta bilang mga mamamayan sa unang peace negotiations pa lamang between the GRP and NDFP. At gusto namin sabihin na sana may boses din yung ibang mamamayan bukod sa dalawang nagtutunggaling panig. At ang mantra nga namin, o siguro ngayon ay parang hashtag ay peace based on justice, peace by means of peace, no? Pero kadalasan nga dahil madalas nagre-breakdown yung talks, ang panawagan namin ay bumalik muli sa peace negotiations. May mga pagkakataon na parang mahirap nga itong negosasyon na ito, tulad nung panahon na itinuri nga na ang pamahalaan ay nagmassacre ng mga magsasaka. Para rin naman sa pamahalaan, hindi rin niya madaling kausapin yung mga tinuturing niyang nag-assassinate daw ng mga opisyal o ng mga pulis. Pero nakikita pa rin natin na mahalaga itong pamamaraan na ito at kahit globally nakikita na kahit yung mga mahirap mag-usap na grupo, ngayon nga sa Afghanistan ay kinakausap nila ang Taliban, ito yung mahalagang paraan pa rin para maabot at matapos sana yung paghihirap ng sambayanan dahil din sa mga epekto ng tunggalian. Ang mahalaga po siguro dito sa peace negotiations na ito ay laging nasa prinsipyo. At kaya nga siguro nagkaroon itong Hague Declaration upang ilinaw kung ano yung mahalagang panuntunan para sa maayos at maprinsipyong pag-uusap. So yun po yung unang punto. Yung pangalawang punto ko lang po ay siguro nga dahil sa mga sinabi nga ni Bishop, parang napakahirap din tingnan kung ano nga ba yung magagawa pa ngayon sa peace negotiations. No? So may katanungan nga sa atin kung ito pa kaya ay panahon dahil na nga sa nangyari na sobra ng violation sa karil, sobrang pagpapatay, sobra ring paghihigpit ng ating democratic space. May katanungan nga siguro na kung magkakapirmahan nga ng agreement halimbawa sa Kaser, totoo kaya na kayang implement ito o may kaseryosohan kaya na ma-implement ito ng kasulukuyang pamahalaan? Sa political and constitutional reform, dahil sa mga nagaganap ngayon, na lalo ngang pinaliliit ang ating demokrasya, nandyan pa yung anti-terrorism law. Ano kaya, at meron pang ibang moves na baguhin daw yung konstitusyon, ano kayang klaseng agreement ang pwedeng magawa? No? So, siguro yun ang isang katanungan na ano pa kaya ang pwedeng magawa at ito ba yung panahon na may maayos tayong mapipirmahan na peace agreement. So siguro mahalaga nga yung sinabi ni Kare Casambre na dapat alisin muna yung mga ilang executive order dyan na talagang sagabal at talagang humahadlang dito sa maayos na pag-uusap. So yun po, no? Kailangan, siguro may pagkabukas pa rin tayo sa peace negotiations, pero dapat maging mulat din tayo sa konteksto. Ano pa kaya ang maaabot natin sa negosasyong ito? At pangatlong punto ko lang po ay gusto kong ibahagi, pero siguro alam din naman ng marami na meron pang mga grupo na gustong makibahagi at makisama, maging suporta at advocates din para sa peace process na ito. No? Gaya siguro nung Coalition for Peace dati, marami nang umusbong na grupo, kasama na rin yung mga nasa CAJP, bukod din pa sa mga reliyoso, may mga grupo ng kababaihan, kabataan, lalo na ng mga indigenous peoples, pati rin mga ibang political groups. At meron din pong mga international groups na nagtatanong kung ano kaya ang espasyo o ano kaya yung lugar na pwede rin silang magkaroon ng boses, makisama rin at dito sa ating peace talks, hindi sa loob ng negosasyon, pero siguro ay sa paligid at sumusuporta. Meron bang lugar o espasyo para dito sa mga masasabing parang independent na third parties? So hindi lang isang third party, kung hindi mga grupo na gusto ring makibahagi at sumuporta dito sa ating peace process. At paano kaya na magkaroon ng makabuluhang pag-uusap at dialogue tungkol dito sa ating pwedeng pagsasama para sa kapayapaan. Ngayon na natigil din naman ang peace negotiations, siguro ito rin yung panahon na pwedeng pag-isipan natin kung ano pa yung pwedeng baguhin, samantalang pinaninindigan na yung na pirmahan ng mga agreement, pero ano pa kaya ang pwede nating idagdag o pwedeng ayusin para lalo ngang maayos ito at magkaroon ng tuloy-tuloy na pag-uusap para sa kapayapaan. Pero siguro, ang huli ko ng punto ito, bago nga mangyari yun, ang mahalaga ay itigil yung patayan. Stop all the killings, yung killings ng ating political consultants, yung mga human rights defenders, napakarami, alam natin, yung mga, lalo na yung mga indigenous peoples, mga lumad na naging biktima ng karahasan. Pero pati rin yung mga, at syempre nakakagulat ngang isipin na sa parang huling bilang ay higit 46 na nasa legal profession, no? Pati mga judges, mga abogado, mga prosecutor ang napapatay. Pero pati rin yung mga drug addict na tinuturing na nga na parang human rights crime. At pati rin ngayon yung mga Moro dito sa Kabakan recently, no. So ito po yung ating panawagan. Ibalik natin ang mga karapatang pantao, itigil yung mga patayan, at ito yung paraan na pwede nating itulak muli ang pag-uusap tungo sa isang kapayapaan na batay sa katarungan. So maraming salamat po at magandang umaga sa inyo.
Maraming salamat, Miss Karen Tanyada. Maraming salamat din po sa ating tatlong tagapagsalita. At para hindi po natin makalimutan, atin pong bubuksan na ang ating hapag virtually para sa ating unang open forum. So ihanda niyo po mga kapatid ang inyong mga questions at ilapag na sa ating chat box. I was trying to confirm kung makakasagot si Bishop Alminasa sa inyong mga question kasi meron na akong mga nakakitang question para sa kanya. But it seems hindi. So sorry po na hindi natin i-ano kay Bishop yung mga questions ninyo. Siguro we will find a way to send it to the good Bishop. Okay, para po sa inyong mga katanungan, i-post nyo na po. At the moment, meron tayong tanong dito para kay Karen. Okay, Karen. Not every peace group seems to be doing similar things. Do the different groups compare notes and work together? Do you have any brilliant ideas for what peace advocates should be doing now? Karen?
Parang nakakatakot yung brilliant idea. Mediocre idea lang siguro. Maganda rin naman siguro na iba-iba ang ginagawa dahil boring naman kung pare-pareho, no? So, may iba-iba hong ginagawa, iba-ibang level, di ba? At ang iba nga ay, hindi ko alam kung sino pa rin yung sumusubok na makipag-usap pa rin sa, kung may posibleng makausap pa rin sa pamahalaan, no? Sa GRP, na pwedeng bumalik, parang pwede may magagawa ba tungkol sa yung EO70 at iba pa, no? So, yun, ito siguro yung isang naiisip natin na bukod sa pag ganitong mga forum, baka meron din pwedeng direktang mag-back channel pa o kumausap. Meron namang mahalagang gawain din ng pagbibigay lang ng edukasyon sa ating mga kabataan at iba pang mga sektor. Siguro mas marami pang madadagdag yung ibang kasama natin dito.
Salamat. Salamat, Karen. Thank you very much. Para po kay Kobe. Pastor Kobe, ito yung question na nandito para sa inyo. Pastor Kobe, you shared to us that Ray Casambre advises that we have to be peace activists. We have heard that Ray speak at many times in a forum or fora. We were surprised when he was red tagged as behind the so-called Red October plot of 2019. Are Trump-up charges an unavoidable risk for peace activists? How can we avoid the same? And yung tanong pa na, how can we help Ray and the other detainees? Pastor Kobe?
Yes, thank you. Let me first of all say that the times are different. I think there is no one who is without risk as we take on the issue of peace. I believe that peace, as we call upon the peace talks, given the new framework of OPAP, is defined now when we call upon the peace panel and the peace talks as supporting a program that is no longer within the OPAP framework. It is supporting a program that the NDFP has been hoping could take place. And so as we push and we know the value of these peace talks, and as we push them forward, it is going to require a certain risk. And we have to take that courage. And I think Ray is trying to tell us that don't be cowed down, don't shy away from it. We need to be able to call upon those talks because it is the likely way forward that we can reach a common understanding. And so how do we avoid, I don't have a solution, and I don't want to say stop calling for peace. That's not the solution. It is just to say we need to build in ourselves some greater courage at this difficult time. And I invite you to that courage. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Kobe. So mga kapatid, napakaraming pwedeng gawin at marami din ang gumagawa, and we do not limit ourselves. At saka sa kay Pastor Kobe din, sabi niya, we really have to take the risk, no? If we have to be peace advocates, lalo na sa panahon na ito, and also take the courage to really move forward. Okay, maraming salamat Pastor Kobe, maraming salamat Miss Karen at saka Bishop Alminasa. Mga kapatid, tunay nga naman na sa mga panahong ito, naging malaking challenge sa ating quest for peace. Tila may napakalaking bato na nakaharang dito sa ating mga gawain pangkapayapaan. Pero hindi ang mga batong ito ang makakapigil sa atin. Matitibag din natin ang bato kung sama-sama at tulong-tulong tayo. Bago tayo tumungo sa ating ikalawang bahagi ng webinar, malugod kong ibinabalita sa inyo na nailabas na ang librong The Quest for Peace ng Cudao Peace Talks Report, Volume 1, 2016 to 2017. Ito ay nailabas na at maaari nang mabili. I hope na nakikita ninyo sa ating screen ngayon. No? Ito po ang libro ng The Quest for Peace ng Cudao na pwede nyo na pong mabili. Salamat sa Cudao sa libreng copy sa akin. At mga kapatid, nandito po nakasulat sa librong ito ang koleksyon ng 116 news reports and essays on the NDFP-GRP peace process. For your copy of the book, please send a private message to Cudao Productions. Ang libro pong ito ay nagkakahalaga ng 250. Okay, maraming salamat. Dadako po tayo ngayon mga kapatid sa ikalawang bahagi ng ating webinar. Kanina ay napakinggan natin mula sa ating tatlong speakers ang mga challenges and obstacles sa pagsulong ng kapayapaan and how to overcome these obstacles. Ngayon naman po, to add more glimmer of hope sapagkat talaga namang kailangan natin ng pag-asa lalo na sa panahon ngayon. Silipin natin ng bahagya ang mga naging tagumpay natin sa usapin ng pagsusulong ng kapayapaan sa mga nakalipas na taon. Eka nga, lingon-lingon din sa pinanggalingan para makarating tayo sa ating paroroonan. To share with us this morning ang nagpapatuloy na pagsulong ng pakikibaka para sa just and lasting peace, ang kabuluhan at inabot nito, at paano tayo hahakbang pasulong. Narito po, kapiling po natin ngayon virtually ang isa sa mga peace consultant para sa National Democratic Front na siya ay kasalukuyang nakaupo bilang consultant sa Political and Constitutional Reforms Agenda mula sa pagiging consultant para sa Socio-Economic Reforms. He graduated cum laude from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he started his activism as student leader. Nakulong ng 3 beses dahil sa kanyang aktivismo sa panahon ng martial law, sa panahon ng martial law sa panahon ni Marcos, sa panahon ni Cory Aquino, at ang pinakahuli ay sa ilalim ni Pangulong Duterte. He was released from detention last January 2019 lamang after the court dismissed the false charges filed against him. Matagal nang kumikilos para sa panlipunang pagbabago mula pa noong kanyang kabataan, mga ka-Zoom, mga ka-FB at sambayanang Pilipino. Tinatawagan po natin si Rafael Ka-Rafi Bailoses. Ka-Rafi!
Beloved Bishop Alminasa and other respected speakers in today's forum, good morning to all of you. I would like to speak as a long-time political activist working and fighting for significant change in our society since the late 1960s. I have been a consultant of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines in the GRP and DFP peace negotiations since the late 1990s. May I take up 2 points in the struggle and campaign for a just and lasting peace, reading from my prepared statement. First, when the peace negotiations were open and held under different regimes of the GRP, it has served as a very important arena for articulating and advancing the rights, interests, and welfare of the exploited and oppressed classes and sectors in our society. But even before these talks were suspended or terminated, mainly by the GRP, the noble and great cause of a just and lasting peace has long been carried both by the armed revolutionary movement of the CPP, NPA, and DFP, and by the legal democratic struggles of various classes and sectors. The NPA and revolutionary peasant associations have worked hard to arouse, organize, and mobilize the poor peasants, farm workers, settlers, and minorities to fight for genuine land reform, rural development, and establish their self-governance. The legal democratic organizations have protested and demanded for various social, economic, political, and cultural reforms. Later on, limited gains in the electoral struggles would supplement these efforts. All this have been translated as concrete demands and proposals in the GRP and DFP peace talks. That being the case, the armed revolutionary and legal parliamentary struggles should accelerate the growth in strength of their forces. Second, several previous regimes of the GRP and the current one have suspended or terminated the GRP and DFP peace talks. At present, the biggest and main obstacle to the advance of the peace talks is the Duterte regime, which had suspended and terminated the talks at least twice, killing it once and for all. To top it all, it has arrested and falsely charged a number of NDFP peace consultants and brutally murdered two of them, Randy Malayao earlier and recently Randall Echanis. It has also arrested or killed several activists defending human rights and working for reforms. These arrests and killings have to be stopped. Moreover, the Duterte regime and its predecessors have carried out and implemented the imperialist dictated neoliberal economic policies that are causing graver underdevelopment and plunder of our country and impoverishment and hunger of our people. Of late, this regime has adopted an anti-terrorist law as an instrument to intensify the suppression not only of suspected revolutionaries, but also of the legal activists and opposition. It has even made use of extended lockdowns to make up for inadequate and defective healthcare system and to take advantage for corruption of huge funds to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. All these have caused so much injustice, turmoil, and unpeace in our country. That being the case, the Duterte regime has to be replaced by a new GRP leadership that will be more open to carrying out necessary reforms and more open to talking with the National Democratic Front of the Philippines to achieve peace by solving the root causes of the armed conflict. That would be all for now, and thank you very much.
Maraming salamat, Ka Rafael Bailoses. Mga kapatid, tulad nga ng naibahagi ni Ginoong Bailoses, may pag-usad ang isinasagawang usapang pangkapayapaan at napakahalaga sa panahon ngayon na ituloy-tuloy ang panawagan para sa pagsusulong ng socio-economic reforms na ito na sa esensya ay pang-araw-araw na buhay na nating mga Pilipino. Huwag nating hayaang lapastanganin at itapon na lamang sa kung saan ang mga inabot na concrete achievements ng peace talks tulad na lamang ng Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law or CARIL. Dapat ito sana ay tuloy-tuloy nating isulong at ipanawagan ang pagkilala at pagtalima dito ng magkabilang panig. And I think Brother Rafael was also trying to say that we should go for whatever it takes, no? Sa pagpatuloy ng usaping pangkapayapaan. At sa susunod na huli pong magbabahagi sa atin sa hapong ito ay masasabi natin na siya ay veterano ng tagapagtaguyod ng tunay na reforma sa lupa. Sa pakikibakang ito ay nakasama niya ng matagal si Randall Echanis, ang NDFP consultant sa Kaser na brutal na pinaslang noong Agosto 10, taong kasalukuyan. Siya ang kasalukuyang tagapagpangulo ng kilusang magbubukid ng Pilipinas, mga kaibigan, kapanalig at mga kasama. Narito po si Danilo Kadaning Ramos. Kadaning?
Magandang tanghali po sa lahat. Una po, maraming salamat sa pagbibigay sa akin ng pagkakataon na makapagsalita, makapagbahagi sa napakahalagang pagtitipon na ito. Binabati po namin ang organizer ng forum na ito. At Una po, nais kong banggitin na imbitasyon at paanyaya. Sa darating pong September 19, alauna hanggang alas 6 ng hapon, ay gaganapin po ang public launching ng Justice for Etianis, Justice for All. Yung pong nabanggit ko ay Justice for Etianis, Justice for All. Hindi po lingid sa inyo na isa pong pangunahing tinataguyod ni Carandal Etianis ay ang pag-iral ng lupa at kapayapaan. Kanina po ay nabanggit ni Bishop yung tungkol po doon sa landless and hungry. Marami po sa ating mga magsasaka, masanganak pawis at mamamayan ay nagugutom. Kaya po napakahalaga talaga na alisin yung balakid sa paghahanap ng kapayapaang nakabatay sa katarungan. At gusto ko pong banggitin na ito pong naganap na COVID-19 pandemic ay nagpahirap pa sa mga magsasaka, masanganak pawis at mamamayan. Alam niyo po, kahit po sa pagsusuri ng Food and Agriculture Organization, inilabas po noong July ng kasalukuyang taon, ang sabi po niya ay 31% jump from 2014 to 2016. 44.9 million ang nagugutom bago si Duterte, pero po nung sa kanyang panahon ay umabot po ito ng 59 million Pilipinos. At gusto ko pong iugnay sa nabanggit po ni Bishop kanina tungkol po sa landlessness, ang kawalan ng lupa ng magsasaka, ang mga programa at patakaran ng gobyerno na nagpapahirap sa mga magsasaka. Kaya po napakahalaga po yung pinag-uusapan natin na pag-iral po ng kapayapaang nakabatay sa hustisyang panlipunan. Kumpara po sa amin, napakahalaga talaga yung pong isinusulong ng NDFP at ng GRP tungkol po doon sa Comprehensive Agreement on Socio-Economic Reform na ang pangunahin pong laman ay ang pagpapaunlad ng kanayunan ng ating bansa para sa magsasaka at mga manggagawa. Kaya nalungkot, naiyak, nagalit ang mga mamamayan sa loob at labas ng bansa sa ginawa pong brutal na pagpaslang kay Carandal Etianis nung madaling araw ng August 10. At gusto ko pong banggitin sa medical certificate ni Dr. Fortun, ang immediate cause po ay intrathoracic hematoma, antecedent cause, injuries to the aorta, heart and esophagus, tapos underlying cause, stab wound of the box. Brutal po siyang pinatay, matibay po paniniwala natin, security forces ang may gawa nito. 5 hanggang 7 katao, madaling araw, ng Agosto a 10. At ayon po sa mga nakarinig ay brutal ang kanyang pagpaslang. Mahalaga po ang ipinaglaban ni Carandal at ng mga nasa peace negotiation mula po sa NDFP. Bakit po siya pinatay? Kaya po napakahalaga, gusto ko pong bigyan ng diin yung kaninang sinabi, alisin yung balakid, ang pagbasura po sa Executive Order number 70, ito pong anti-terrorism law ngayon, yung pong Memorandum Order number 32 ay napakahalagang mawala at magkaroon po ng paggalang sa karapatang pangtao. At bilang panghuli, gusto ko pong ulitin, napakahalaga po ang pagkakaisa ng mga magsasaka at sambayan ng Pilipino para po tutulan ang tirano, ang diktador sa ating bayan at ipursu. Katulad po ng binanggit ni Bishop, gusto ko pong dinan, we must rise, pursue justice. Mahalaga po ito para sa interes ng ating mga kababayan at malakas po nating panawagan, hustisya para kay Carandal Etianis, hustisya para sa lahat. Ito pong para kay Marlon, Sara, Carlito, Jory at kay Karandal. At panghuli po, dapat po tayong magpatuloy. Ikakarangal po natin ang ating ginagawa. Hindi po ito masama. Ito'y para sa interes ng bayan at sa susunod pang henerasyon. Mamamayan kumilos, tama na, sobra na. Wakasan na po natin ang biro sa Malacanang. Makibaka, huwag matakot. Mabuhay po kayo. Mabuhay ang sambayan ng kumikilos para sa bayan.
Maraming salamat ka Daning. Mga kapatid, narinig po natin na mayroong liwanag sa usaping pangkapayapaan kapag tayo pong lahat ay patuloy at tuloy-tuloy na nagsasama at nagkakaisang kumikilos, at mukhang maliwanag sa dalawa nating speakers na alisin ang mga balakid ng kapayapaan ng ating bayan. Kung kinilala sana...
Reverend, isa lang po palang napakahalaga. Nakalagay po sa note ko at nakalimutan ko.
Sige po.
Mahalaga po na palayain ang lahat ng bilanggong politikal. 646 po sila ngayon, 413 under Duterte administration, ang 11 po ay mga peace consultant. So malakas pong panawagan natin, kagyat na palayain ang lahat ng bilanggong politikal. Maraming salamat po.
Ayun, maraming salamat ka Daning. Yun na nga mga kapatid, kung kinikilala lang sana ng kasalukuyang administrasyon at mahigpit na ipinapatupad ang mga inabot na mga panalo ng usaping pangkapayapaan katulad nga po ng Karil. Sana sa ngayon ay kapiling pa rin natin sina Randall Echanes, sina Randy Malayaw, sina Zara Alvarez, Carlito Badion, Dr. Lourdes Tanco, Attorney Ben Ramos at napakahabang listahan ng mga peace advocates and human rights defenders na pinaslang. So at sila ay mga peace advocates, peace builders and social activists. Kaya sa yugtupong ito, bigyan po natin sila ng pagpupugay, handugan ng awitin ang mga martir ng bayan. Please take this time also mga kapatid na magnilay at sila ay i-remember at magpapatatag ng ating mga sarili sa patuloy na pagsusulong ng kapayapaan. At habang nagpi-play po tayo, kung meron kayong mga katanungan ay i-post nyo na po sa FB, i-post din dito sa ating Zoom. Narito po ang People's Choral sa awitin na Aling Pag-ibig Pa na inawit nila kasama si Bayan Muna Representative Ferdinand Gaite and Dr. Carol Araolio of Bayan.
Aling pag-ibig pa ang hihigit kaya sa pag-ibig ko sa iyo, bayan ko. Sa hirap at ginhawa, sa higaya't talita, ako'y kasama mo.
Sa bukid bayan ko, kung tigang ang lupa at di ka makaluha, ako ang magdidilig.
Kung nalaglag
sa pag-ibig ko sa'yo, bayan ko. Sa hirap at ginhawa, sa ligaya at galita, ako'y kasama mo. Kung ang gintong palay ay kumakaway, katabi mo ko sa bukid bayan ko.
Kung tigang
Lupa ay biglang di makaluha, ako ang magdidilig. Kung ang bulaklak
ay humaling,
halimuyak, igagawa kita ng pintas bayan ko. Kung nalalanta ang magsisigwa, ako'y may tubong ligtas. May pag-ibig pa bang higit na dakila sa pag-ibig ko sa'yo, bayan ko? Wala na, wala, wala na, wala. Wala na, wala.
Maraming salamat, People's Choral. Ayan mga kapatid, sabi ng awit, sa hirap at ginhawa, sa ligaya't dalita, ako'y kasama mo. At of course, sa pagkamit ng kapayapaan, tayo ay go, go, go! Anyway, bago ako madala ng aking damdamin, atin na pong basahin ang mga katanungan. Mga kapatid, ipadala niyo na po ang inyong mga katanungan sa ating Facebook at sa ating Zoom. Meron tayong katanungan dito para sa ating dalawang speaker galing sa mga manggagawa at ang isa ay galing sa sektor ng mga magsasaka. Unahin ko po ang para kay question dito para kay Karafi. At medyo marami ito so I will just say it in dalawahin ko siguro sa pagtanong, no? Dalawang set. So Karafi, in the light of the killings of Karandi and Karandal, it shows that some forces within the GRP are not respecting the Jasig. Are there any remedies for this? Don't you think you are just courting danger by speaking out so publicly? So dun sa nangyari kay Randy at kay Karandal, kasi sila pong dalawa ay dapat protected sila ng joint agreement on safety and immunity guarantees. Ang isa sa ibig sabihin nun, dapat ay hindi sila hulihin at hindi rin sila patayin, no? Pero it shows na parang hindi na respeto ng GRP forces. May remedy ba dito? Ang pangalawa po ay para po sa inyo. Hindi nyo ba iniisip na sinusuong nyo lang ang danger na siguro ang sinasabi sa tanong ay baka matulad kayo sa kanila for coming out here and speaking publicly. And in line with that also, may maitutulong ba sa ganitong mga sitwasyon ang mga peace advocates? Yung pangalawang question po ay mamaya. Karandi? Ang Rafi? Please, sir. Thank you.
Sa risk na tinitake ko ngayon sa paglitaw ko bilang consultant pa rin ng National Democratic Front of the Philippines sa peace talks, talagang bahagi na yan sa pakikibaka para sa makabuluhang pagbabago sa ating lipunan. Bahagi rin yan ng pakikibaka para sa isang makatarungan at pangmatagalang kapayapaan. Yung ginawang brutal na pagpapahirap bago siya patayin, si Karandi Chanis, ay hindi lamang paglabag sa Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees. Pinagtibay na yan ng dalawang panig noon pa, kundi paglabag yan sa Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. Yan yung unang kasunduang pinagtibay ng dalawang panig noong pang late 1990s. Ang magagawang mabisang remedyo dyan para mabigyan ng katarungan, ang pagkamatay niya, hindi lamang niya, kundi ni kasamang Randy Malayaw, isa ring peace consultants, nung mas maaga pa, palakasin pa ng mga demokratikong sektor, ng mga kaibigang mapagmahal sa kalayaan, ang panawagan na bigyan ng katarungan sa pamamagitan ng pagtukoy at pagparusa sa mga brutal na nagpahirap at pumaslang sa kanila. Iyan ang tingin ko pinakamabisang paraan para mabigyan ng katarungan ang kanilang kamatayan.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Karafi. Para po sa pangalawang katanungan, para po sa inyo, you have had a lifetime of service and your reputation as a fiery workers organizer comes from stories of struggle. Do you find it difficult to work both for peace and struggle for justice? What is most difficult about being a peace worker? Ano po sa inyo, sa feeling ninyo yung pagtatrabaho para sa hustisya, para sa manggagawa, at yung para sa kapayapaan? Was it difficult or was it easy or ano po? Salamat po. Sige po.
Walang malaking kahirapan sa paggampan ng dalawang tungkulin na yan. Hindi naman magkasalungat ang pakikibaka, ang paghahangad ng kabutihan sa interes at kagalingan ng mga manggagawa. Dahil yan din ay isa sa mga mahalagang kahilingang nakapaloob sa mga panukala ng NDFP sa bahagi ng social and economic reforms, lalong-lalo na doon sa bahagi ng karapatan ng mga nagtatrabahong mamamayan, rights of the working people.
Maraming salamat po, Karafi. Para po sa ating katanungan kay Kadaning naman. Kadaning.
Sige po.
Salamat po. Ito po ang katanungan para sa inyo. Peace advocates were surprised. Nagulat po ang mga peace advocates nung parang ang GRP negotiating panel ay parang sumasang-ayon doon sa pamamahagi ng lupa sa mga landless natin na mga magsasaka sa ilalim ng agrarian reform and rural development. I think sa ilalim ito ng KASER, do you think na ang kamatayan ni Randall ay isang kabahagi ng isang pagtatangka na ang negosasyong ito, yung peace negotiation, ay hindi magpatuloy? Tapos isama ko na rin po ito, why are farmers the most populous bakit po ang pinakamaraming pinapaslang sa ilalim ng political killing sa ating bansa ay nasa hanay ng mga magsasaka? Yun po, katanungan na magkasama. Sige po, Kadaning.
Salamat po. Doon po sa una, mahalaga po na makita na yung pong KASER ay sa interes po ng masang anak pawis at mamamayang Pilipino. Ngayon, sa kabilang banda ay base po sa pagsusurit karanasan, wala pong layunin ng Duterte administration na marisolba yung ugat ng kahirapan sa ating bayan. At sa halip, yung pong mga peace advocates, yung pong mga nananawagan ng lupa para sa magsasaka ay hindi lang po pinapatay, inaaresto, nire-red tag. Kaya iba po talaga ang patakaran, policy at direksyon ng Duterte administration. At sa katunayan po, wala pong plano ang kasalukuyang gobyerno na masolusyonan ang panawagan ng magsasaka na napakatagal na lupa para sa magsasaka, manggagawang agrikultural, manggagawang bukid at paunlarin ng agrikultura. Sa halip, patuloy pong pagtalima sa neoliberalismo, lalo po yung pagsandig sa import sa bigas at iba pang pagkain. Okay, kaya po napakahalaga talaga yung laman ng kaser at sa panukala po namin kasama ang makabayan ang pagsasabatas, pagpapatupad ng Genuine Agrarian Reform Bill o GARB. Pangalawa po, doon po sa bakit maraming mga magsasaka, sa amin pong pagtingin ay yung pong mga magsasaka ay tumitindig para ipagtanggol, ipaglaban ang karapatan sa lupa. Kasama po yung mga manggagawang agrikultural, mga sakada sa Negros at mga katutubo po sa iba't ibang panig ng bansa. Sila po yung naninindigan, kami yung naninindigan na karapatan sa lupa para sa magsasaka, hindi sa mga dayuhan, hindi sa ilan. Kaya po, ito yung pangunahing target ng atake, pagpaslang, EGK, at hindi po lingid sa inyo. Yung pong mga massacre sa Sagay, Gihulungan, at Negros 14 sa isla ng Negros, ito po ay mga magsasaka, sakada, manggagawang agrikultural, at meron pong dalawang barangay official. Kaya po, mahalaga yung pong kaninang nabanggit na paano po yung pagsasama-sama natin, magsasaka at mamamayan, magpatuloy sa paglaban dahil naniniwala po kami, ang issue ng magsasaka at pag-unlad ng agrikultura ay issue po ng taong bayan. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Kadaning, sa inyong mga sagot. Mga kapatid, salamat po sa inyong mga katanungan at marami pa pong mga katanungan ang patuloy na pumapasok. So, ay heads up natin yung set 1 natin na panels. Meron pa rin mga pumapasok po na mga katanungan para sa inyo. Kaya ihanda po ninyo ang inyong mga sarili at ibabato na natin sa inyo ang mga katanungan na ito. Okay, para po kay Kobe or Karen, meron pong katanungan dito galing kay Gus Miklat. Okay. Ang tanong ay, pangalawa niyang inulit ito, so I will try to, on the second time. Yun, na-appreciate, sabi ni Gus, na na-appreciate yung speaking about broadening yung peace constituency, yung maraming ginagawa at hindi nililimit yung gawain. So here is the question. We know how hard is Duterte. Matigas pa sa kay Marcos. What option must we do to ensure that peace based on justice shall reign in our country? Are there
hindi po yan yung tanong ko. Kay Edil Guyano po
thank
yan.
you. Ay, okay. Salamat, Gus. Okay, eto. Pastor Kobe and Miss Karen spoke about the need to broadening the peace constituency for the peace process. Salamat, Gus. Ito yung question. It would be nice to know if they have some specific ideas on how to do and navigate this and convince the conflict actors of this essential need. Salamat po, Pastor
Salamat
Kobe.
din po.
Salamat. Okay, para sa response po.
Sige, sir. Sir Gus, let me begin by talking about the broadening aspect. No, actually, unfortunately, we are in many ways losing the broadening aspect in light of LCAC. LCAC implements a program in LGUs and schools all over the country that is using a narrative that I will call the narrative of the dehumanized. It is taking a term, CTG, or Communist Terrorist Group, and using that to evoke fear, to evoke the scare of those who are students, those who are in LGUs, to fear anyone associated with what they are calling the communist terrorist groups. And because of LCAP, there is this widespread ability to get to the LGUs, get to the schools and the like. So the broadening aspect, unfortunately, is sweeping in the direction of creating a divided country over this concept of LCAP. And I think in terms of our fabric as a nation, as a people, there will be many years of being divided because of this kind of myth of a narrative of the dehumanized being anyone associated with the communist terrorist group. It's a very terrible strategy that's being imposed on the country. And so I think for us, what I would say is creative activism prospers in diversity. I would say that if we can all begin to be thinking creatively from our different perspectives and our different sectors, how we can unite on a common goal, but yet provide options in different ways of how we move this difficult situation forward or move beyond the difficult situation that we're in. So I would say we need to be creative as we can be in this difficult time. I know that the sector I work with, which is basically church, is looking at ways in which we can engage partners in ways we can use our institution as a whole, from the schools down to every parish of awakening. But still, you know, the engagement is needing much more energy and strength. And so I would say that it is a time of really discerning creativity. And that's why we're here today, is to think together. How can we come up with some common goals and yet express them and usher them in our different creative ways and approaches? Maybe Karen has something to say to that as well.
Sige po.
Dagdag na lang siguro kasi yun nga, yung sinabi ni Kobe na mahirap nga yung sitwasyon, at siguro kaya maganda na meron tayong ilang creative ways na mabasag nga yung parang pinalalabas ng eklabu na dinidivide tayo, no? So siguro more actions that show our unity for peace and creative ways, especially with young people, siguro makakatulong yon. Yun lang siguro muna.
Maraming salamat, Pastor Kobe at Karen. Meron pa pong napakaraming katanungan, so I think we shall proceed na. Para po sa next question natin, ang next question po natin ay galing sa kay Elmer Labog ng KMU. So I feel na ito ay para kay Karafi. My question, in 2017, a joint draft declaration on rural development was agreed upon by the GRP and the NDFP. While there are still several contentious issues in the aforementioned joint document, the agreed points are sufficient enough to kick off a program of rural development, specifically land reform. There are detailed proposals in the joint declaration. How in heaven's name could we make the government, which undeniably will make progress among our people even under the current COVID-19 pandemic? Yun po ang question po, Rafi.
Una, tama yon na Noon pang 2017 hanggang early 2018 na pagkasunduan na, may pagkakasundo na basically sa nilalaman ng Comprehensive Agreement on Socio-Economic Reforms pagdating sa pagpapatupad ng tunay na reforma agraryo at pati na sa pambansang industrialisasyon, pagtatayo ng mga industriyang Pilipino para umunlad ang ating bansa. Kailangan na lang sanang i-formalize yan ng dalawang panel. Yung trinabahong yan at pinagkasundoan na ng mabuti sa level ng mga working committees nila. Yun ang hindi natuloy noong June or third quarter ng 2018 when supposed to be magre-resume uli ang formal peace negotiations pero hindi naman talaga ginawa. Pinatay na ng rehimeng Duterte ang peace talks noong panahong yon. Supposed to be kasama pa sana ako noon, nakakulong pa ako noon, kasama pa ako doon sa gagawing talks. Mahigit na 1 linggo akong binigyan ng bail ng Regional Trial Court para makapagbiyahe. Hindi ako pinalabas ng kulungan kasi wala sila talagang plano noon na ipagpatuloy pa ang peace negotiations.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Karafi. Mga kapatid, salamat talaga sa inyong mga katanungan. Subalit wala na po tayong time. We will find ways na ito po ay makarating sa ating mga speakers and also hopefully maka-get back po sa inyo. So maraming salamat sa inyong mga katanungan at sa inyong mga engagement. May mga appreciations din. Marami pong salamat. Maraming salamat sa ating mga speakers. So matapos mga kapatid nating talakayin ang mga hinggil sa mga balakid sa kapayapaan, gayon din ang mga tagumpay. Naniniwala tayong dapat na isulong talaga natin ang kapayapaan sa ating bayan. At this point, babasahin po natin ang Peace Advocates Joint Statement. And I hope you can join us po sa pagbabasa silently. Peace Advocates Joint Unity Statement. Stop the killings. Remove the obstacles to a just and lasting peace. A joint statement by peace advocates. We are peace advocates alarmed at the spate of extrajudicial killings of National Democratic Front of the Philippines peace consultants, human rights workers, social activists, and dissenters in the country. Before and after they were summarily killed, all of the victims were maliciously tagged by police, military, and state security officials as communist terrorists. Leaders and members of so-called front organizations of the CPP and NPA-NDFP. Many were accused of fabricated charges linking them to alleged activities of the armed revolutionary movement. We believe that these increased incidents of public vilifications and false charges leading to summary extrajudicial killings are the result of the Duterte administration's campaign to purportedly end the armed conflict with the CPP-NPA-NDF by mid-2022, be it at the expense of human rights, civil liberties, and human lives. President Duterte himself has repeatedly incited and brazenly ordered the police and military to kill and violate human rights, form hit squads, and learn the art of assassination for this purpose. It is evident that martial law in Mindanao, Memorandum Order 32, declaring a state of emergency in Negros Island, Samar and Bicol region, and Executive Order Number 70, creating the National Task Force to End the local communist armed conflict and the institutionalizing the whole of nation approach to counterinsurgency have spurred extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, illegal arrest and detention, and other grave human rights violations. The passage and signing into law of RA 11479, the so-called Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, further encourages and provides legal cover for such operations despite its highly questionable constitutional and legal basis. The GRP and DFP peace negotiations are a direct casualty of the military state policy. The death knell for the peace talks was sounded through Presidential Proclamation 360, issued 23 November 2017, unilaterally terminating the peace negotiations. This was followed by the Proclamation 374, issued 5 December 2017, declaring the CPP-NPA as terrorist organization, and the Department of Justice petition in a Manila court to prescribe the CPP-NPA as such. The issuance of EO 70 on 4 December 2018 abandoned the peace negotiations on the national level with finality, purportedly substituting in its place localized peace talks. With President Duterte closing the door to a comprehensive political settlement for a just and lasting peace, his administration, through the NTF-ELCAC, is attempting to rally the entire nation behind a militarist solution to the armed conflict, employing the entire civilian bureaucracy and mobilizing the private sector for this purpose. Those who disagree with or oppose this approach, from peace advocates, social activists to the political opposition, are red, yellow, and terrorist tagged, vilified as obstructing the nation's march to peace, and then set up for all kinds of ridiculous accusations and violent attacks. The latest victim include murdered NDFP peace consultants Randy Malayo and Randall Echenes, and Negros human rights defender Zara Alvarez. This path of state violence and terror can never succeed in ending an armed movement that is rooted in the Filipino people's historic and legitimate quest for social justice, national sovereignty, and genuine democracy. 14 years of the Marcos fascist dictatorship and 34 years of subsequent bloody counterinsurgency programs proved this beyond doubt. We reiterate that despite its long and arduous path, the GRP-NDFP peace negotiations has made considerable headway toward resolving the armed conflict. It has resulted in several major agreements between the two parties, including the Hague Joint Declaration on the Framework for the Talks, the Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees, agreements on ground rules, procedures, reciprocal working committees, and the first of 4 substantive agreements, the Comprehensive Agreement on the Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. Under the Duterte administration, the two sides were close to reaching an agreement on a coordinated ceasefire, the release of political prisoners, and key provisions of the Comprehensive Agreement on Social and Economic Reforms, that is, on agrarian reform and rural development, and national industrialization and economic development. At this juncture, to return to the peace negotiations, we are one in urgently calling for a stop of the killings and the removal of all the obstacles to a just and lasting peace, including Proclamations 360 and 374, MO 332, EO number 70, and RA 11479, or the Anti-Terrorism Law. The anti-terrorism law will not only snuff out dissent, it will stifle and squelch all discussion and debate on the roots of the armed conflict, and thus bury all hope of resolving this peacefully. Ultimately, the aforementioned obstacles to genuine peace negotiations will not end the armed conflict, but rather further fuel and instigate it. In this time of COVID-19 pandemic and the worsening of the socio-economic crisis, the last thing the country needs is an escalation of the bloodshed. Now more than ever, let the clarion call for a just peace resound throughout the land. Salamat po at antabananan po ninyo ang statement na ito sa inyong mga doorstep para sa inyong mga pagperma. Nanalapit na po ang pagtatapos ng ating programa. Without further ado, at ihanda po natin ang ating mga placards. Without further ado, tatawagin po natin si Dr. Carol P. Araolio, Chairperson of Bagong Alyansang Makabayan at Convener ng Kapayapaan para sa pagsasara ng ating Say Your Peace webinar. Dr. Carol?
Anyway, I just said na maraming salamat doon sa lahat na nagsalita at nagbahagi at sa tingin ko ay napakasustansya ng ating naging webinar ngayong umaga at sana ay ang mga hindi nakadalo sa live ay makapanood nito sa hinaharap kapag na-post na ang recorded webinar sa mga websites. Gusto kong i-wrap up yung ating webinar ngayong umaga. Basically, pupulot ako dun sa mga sinabi ng bawat nagsalita, more or less. No? How to say peace given conditions so unconducive, if not antagonistic, to the reign of peace or to the quest for peace. But we must say peace, nonetheless, not carelessly, as the prophet Jeremiah who lamented, they have treated the wounds of my people carelessly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. We must embrace the difficult work of peace, not the peace of the graveyard as those who advocate all-out war versus peace talks, now in the name of the whole of nation approach to end the armed conflict. When peace advocates call to address the roots of the armed conflict, we embrace the difficult yet vital work of peace building. As peace advocates, we cannot accept the abandonment of the GRP and the FP peace negotiations when the underlying causes of the armed conflict can be addressed on the negotiating table and not just in the battlefield. And yet, the current situation stares us in the face. The obstacles to resuming peace talks, honest to goodness negotiations on the substantive agenda seem so insurmountable. Allow me to encapsulate them. All-out war, EJKs left and right, of suspected drug users, of human rights defenders, peace consultants and advocates. Proclamation 360, Proclamation 374, Memorandum 32, Executive Order 70, creating the National Task Force to end the communist local armed conflict, the so-called anti-terrorism law, and repeated attempts to junk the Hague Joint Declaration, gross violations of JASI, Karil, and the refusal to activate the Joint Monitoring Committee of Karil. Before, we thought that these were the doings of militarists within the Duterte cabinet. But it has become starkly clear that this has solidified into a state policy of the Duterte administration. No more peace talks. Crush the insurgency. Go after and quote unquote neutralize all the supporters of the CPP, NPA, and DFP as terrorists. Thus, no amount of pleading for peace talks resumption. If these obstacles are not firmly identified and calls made for them to be removed by the current administration will go unheeded. Then again, there are those who decry. What about the soldiers who are killed or maimed because of the armed conflict? Or more specifically, due to the military tactical offensives by the New People's Army? Our answer: the armed conflict is a fact. That is why there are peace negotiations. If there were no longer any armed encounters between government troops and the NPA, there would be no reason nor need for peace talks. The good news is that in the interim peace agreement that should have been signed by both sides if Duterte had not unilaterally canceled negotiations, the interim peace agreement included a simultaneous unilateral ceasefire. Apart from the promise of government to release all political prisoners through amnesty and the signing of the two major sections of CASER on agrarian reform and rural development and national industrialization and economic development. What about the human rights violations and the violations of international humanitarian law by the CPP and NPA so-called, or by the GRP? What we say to this is that there is Karil with mechanisms for accountability that are more effective than public complaints and accusations from either side and from touted victims. At the end of the day, the roots of the armed conflict must be addressed if a just and lasting peace can be brought about. As many social and political activists are already doing on a daily basis, the struggle for meaningful, substantial reforms in all spheres, socio-economic, political, cultural, the struggle for land, jobs, justice, and peace, and I would dare say moral regeneration, is being worked on by activists every day, every single day. But as peace and human rights advocates, we have the exceptional duty to sound the clarion call for a stop to the killings of human rights defenders, the removal of the obstacles to a just peace, and the resumption of peace negotiations on the basis of previous agreements and on the basis of the advances already made. And of course, the release of all political prisoners. Lastly, I would like to address the points raised by Karen and Kobe and other peace advocates in the chat. Is there a way of jump-starting the broadening of peace advocacy in the land in the light of these very unconducive conditions? How can this be done concretely? Ang tingin ko po dito, ang pwedeng gumawa ng konkretong hakbang dito ay ang lahat ng mga iba't ibang klase ng mga peace advocates groups currently existing. Let's put our heads together. Let's dialogue on this, and let's think of creative ways of starting unified projects. And I'm sure the time is ripe for this. I hope the Coalition for a Just Peace, the Gaston Ortigas Foundation, Initiatives for International Dialogue of the group of Gasmiklat, and also the Sulong Karil and other groups. Let us put our heads together and let us work on this concretely and soon. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Carol. Bago po tayo magtapos, mga kapatid, ay hinihiling po namin na inyong i-open ang inyong mga camera sa mga kasama natin dito sa Zoom at hawakan ninyo at ilagay sa inyong harapan ang mga inihanda ninyong mga call and fun signs katulad ng hinahawakan ko. Okay? And if we are ready, we are gonna do the photo op. So please give me a heads up sa in charge kung nakahanda na. or shall we do a count, no? Tingnan natin. Okay. Okay, handa na. Yeah. Yung secretariat po at staff ay ang magsasagawa ng pagkuha ng picture. Okay. Bibilangan natin ha para siguradong nakahanda at malaman ni okay. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Maraming salamat po at sa pagtatapos natin mga kapatid, papakinggan natin ang awiting Tuloy ang Laban mula sa People's Choral. Sa muli, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Habang mayroong pagsasamantala, habang mayroong pang-aalipusta, tuloy ang laban ng masa, tuloy ang marcha ng pakikisa. Habang naghahari na riyan pa, habang bayan natin riyan pa, tuloy ang laban, tuloy ang ating pagkikibaka, tuloy ang sigaw ng paglaya. Damhin natin ang panagoy ng bayan, harapin natin ang totoong kalagayan, yakapin natin ang kanilang paglaban, pagtikisin ang lakas ng mamamayan. Habang mayroong pagsasamantala, habang mayroong pang-aalipusta, tuloy ang laban ng masa, tuloy ang marcha ng pakikisa. Habang naghahari na yan pa, habang bayan natin yan pa, tuloy ang laban, tuloy ang ating pakikibaka, tuloy ang sigaw ng paglaya. Manggagawa, tuloy pa rin ang welga, mga magsasaka, daing pa rin ay lupa. Maralitang tagalunsod, tinataboy ng sistema, kawayan at pambansang binaya. Habang mayroong pagsasamantala,